That night, my brother laughed in front of his important clients and told me this restaurant was above my level. I did not argue. I simply checked my watch and waited for the manager to approach and address me as the owner. But shattering his ego was just the beginning. The secret I was about to reveal would cost him his contract and force my family to beg for an emergency meeting. My name is Tessa Vaughn, and I have learned that the most dangerous person in a room is rarely the one making the most noise. I walked into Velour at exactly 7:30 in the evening. The restaurant was humming with the low, sophisticated murmur of old money and new deals, a sound I had engineered down to the decibel. I was 34 years old, and tonight I wore a black dress that cost more than my brother's car. Though it carried no logo that he would recognize, it was silk, cut on the bias, designed to disappear into the shadows rather than catch the light. I did not wear diamonds. I did not carry a designer clutch with a screaming monogram. I simply walked in with the posture of someone who had nothing to prove. The hostess, a sharp young woman named Sarah, who had been with me since the opening 2 years ago, looked up. Her eyes widened a fraction of an inch, a microscopic break in her professional mask, before she smoothed it back into place. She knew the protocol: no special greetings, no fanfare. To the naked eye, I was just a walk-in guest, hoping for a cancellation. I gestured slightly toward the back corner, a secluded booth that offered a panoramic view of the dining floor while keeping the occupant effectively invisible. Sarah nodded imperceptibly and led me through the dining room. I moved through the space I owned, noting the details. The lighting was dialed to the perfect amber hue. The velvet on the banquettes was crushed platinum, spotless. The scent in the air was roasted garlic, thyme, and the faint, crisp smell of expensive wine. It was perfect. And then there was the imperfection. Sitting at table 1, the prime circular booth in the center of the room, usually reserved for celebrities or politicians, was my brother, Ethan Vaughn. He was holding court. That was the only way to describe it. He was leaning back, one arm draped over the plush upholstery, a glass of Bordeaux in his hand. He was surrounded by 3 men in suits, potential investors. If I had to guess by the way Ethan was laughing too loudly at his own jokes, he looked the part of the successful venture capitalist he pretended to be. His suit was tailored, his hair was perfectly gelled, and his teeth were whitened to a blinding shade. But I knew the truth. I knew his credit limit was maxed out, and that the lease on his flashy sports car was 2 months behind. I drifted past his table, keeping my gaze forward, but his radar for opportunities to belittle me was, as always, impeccable. He spotted me. The conversation at his table stopped as he raised a hand, not in greeting, but in a gesture of halted surprise. He looked me up and down, his eyes snagging on the simplicity of my dress. He probably thought I had bought it at a discount store. Ethan let out a short, incredulous laugh. He turned to his guests, ensuring they were part of the joke. "Excuse me, gentlemen," he said, his voice projecting across the quiet room. "It seems my little sister has wandered in." He turned his full attention to me, his smile tight and condescending. "Tessa, did you get lost? The delivery entrance is around the back if you're looking for a job. Or did you actually think you could get a table here?" I stopped. I did not flinch. I did not blush. I slowly turned to face him. The restaurant was quiet enough that nearby tables had stopped eating to watch. This was the theater of the rich. They loved a public humiliation, as long as it wasn't theirs. "Hello." "Ethan," I said. My voice was even, devoid of the shame he was trying to provoke. He swirled his wine, looking at his guests with a conspiratorial wink. "This is Tessa. She is the family. Free spirit." He emphasized the words as if they meant failure. "Look, Tess, this place? It is Velour. It is strictly reservations only, and the waiting list is 3 months long. It is frankly above your level. Why don't you go down the street to that burger place? I will Venmo you $20 so you can get a meal on me." One of the men at his table chuckled nervously, unsure if he should join in the cruelty. Ethan took that as encouragement. I stood my ground. I did not look at the floor. I looked him dead in the eye. "I am fine. Ethan, enjoy your dinner." I turned and continued following Sarah to my corner table. I could feel his eyes burning into my back. He was not used to me walking away. He was used to me crying, or arguing, or shrinking. My indifference was an insult to his ego. I sat down in the booth. It was dark, intimate, and gave me a direct line of sight to his table. A waiter appeared instantly. It was David, one of my best servers. He knew exactly who I was. He knew I signed his paychecks. He knew I had paid for his daughter's braces last year as a bonus, but he played his part perfectly. "Sparkling water, please," I said softly. "Right away." "Miss," David said, bowing his head slightly before vanishing. At the center table, Ethan was fuming. I could see the agitation in his shoulders. My presence was ruining his performance. He felt the need to reassert dominance. He snapped his fingers, actually snapped them, at a passing staff member. "Get me the manager," he barked. I watched as Miles, the general manager of Velour, straightened his tie and walked over. Miles was a man of impeccable standards. He was British, 60 years old, and had managed 3 Michelin-starred restaurants before I poached him. He had zero tolerance for rudeness, but he had the patience of a saint for the sake of business. "Yes, sir? How can I help you?" Miles asked, his voice a smooth baritone. Ethan gestured toward my corner with his wine glass, a splash of red liquid threatening to spill onto the white tablecloth. "That woman over there," Ethan said, loud enough for me to hear clearly. "She is bothering my guests. She is lowering the tone of the establishment. I want her removed." Miles glanced toward me. I was sitting perfectly still, my hands folded on the table, watching the scene unfold like a movie critic. "Sir, the lady is simply having water," Miles said politely. "She does not appear to be disturbing anyone." Ethan huffed, his face flushing a light shade of pink. "Look, I know the owner. We are tight. If you tell him Ethan Vaughn is here, he will tell you to do whatever I say." I took a sip of the water David had just placed in front of me. The bubbles pricked my tongue. The lie was so blatant, so lazy. Miles paused. "I know the owner as well, sir." Ethan pulled his wallet from his jacket pocket. He slid a crisp $100 bill across the table, covering it with his palm. "Look, let's just handle this quietly. She is my sister, and she has some mental issues. She thinks she belongs places she doesn't. Just escort her out. Tell her the section is closed. Do it for the family." The guests at his table looked uncomfortable now. One of them checked his watch. The atmosphere had shifted from power lunch to domestic dispute, and it was turning sour. Miles looked down at the hand covering the money. Then, he looked up. He turned his head slowly and locked eyes with me across the room. The entire restaurant seemed to hold its breath. The clinking of silverware stopped. The silence was heavy, thick with anticipation. I held Miles's gaze. My expression remained neutral. I gave a single, slow nod. It was the only permission he needed. Miles turned back to Ethan. He did not touch the money. He stepped back, clasping his hands behind his back, his posture rigid and commanding. "I am afraid I cannot do that, sir," Miles said. Ethan's eyes bulged. "Excuse me? Do you know who I am? I will have your job. I will call the owner right now and—" "Sir," Miles interrupted, his voice cutting through Ethan's bluster like a scalpel. "You keep mentioning the owner. I think it is time you were corrected." Ethan stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. "I am done with this service. Who do you think runs this place?" Miles gestured toward me with an open palm, a movement of reverence and deference. "The owner of Velour is sitting right there," Miles said. Ethan blinked. He looked at Miles, then at me, then back at Miles. "What?" Miles continued, his voice projecting clearly to every corner of the room. "Miss Tessa Vaughn is the sole owner of Velour. She also owns this entire building, the land it sits on, and the parking structure where you parked your leased vehicle." The silence that followed was absolute. It was a vacuum that sucked the air out of the room. Ethan's mouth opened, but no sound came out. He looked at his guests. The investors were staring at me with new eyes, eyes that assessed, calculated, and suddenly realized they were betting on the wrong horse. Ethan looked back at me. His face was a mask of confusion and horror. But no, she is broke. She is nobody. Miles stepped forward, picking up the wine bottle from Ethan's table to inspect the label. A subtle power move. Miss Vaughn is one of the most successful real estate developers in the city. Sir, we operate entirely under her direction. Ethan collapsed back into his chair. He looked small. The bravado had evaporated, leaving behind a sweaty, panicked man in a suit he could not afford. He looked at me, pleading silently for me to say it was a joke, to say that I was just house-sitting, to give him an out. I did not give him an out. I lifted my glass of water and a mock toast. Miles walked over to my table. Should I have security escort him out? Madame? He asked quietly. I looked at Ethan. He was pale. His guests were already reaching for their phones, likely Googling my name and realizing the massive error they were about to make by signing with him. If I kicked him out now, he could play the victim. He could say I was petty. No, Miles, I said, my voice carrying just enough for Ethan to hear. Let him finish his meal. I took a slow sip of water, feeling the cool liquid soothe the fire in my chest. Let him eat every bite, I said. Everything tastes better when you know the truth. And besides, the best part usually comes after dessert. To understand why I felt no guilt watching my brother choke on his own arrogance in my restaurant. You have to understand the architecture of the Vaughn family. In construction, there is a concept called the load-bearing wall. It is the structure that holds everything up, the piece that matters. In our house, that was Ethan. I was merely the drywall, decorative, perhaps necessary for a finished look, but ultimately replaceable and entirely non-structural. From the moment I could form memories, the dynamic was absolute. Ethan was the golden child, the sun around which my parents orbited. I was the afterthought, the satellite that drifted in the cold outer rings. It was not that they were abusive in the traditional sense. They fed me, clothed me, and sent me to school. But there is a specific kind of neglect that happens in upper-middle-class homes that is far more insidious than hunger. It is the neglect of being unseen. I remember being 8 years old. It was a Tuesday, a humid afternoon in late May. I had just won the district art competition. It was not a participation trophy. I had beaten 200 other children. My drawing, a charcoal sketch of the old oak tree in the park, had been selected for display at the city library. I remember holding the blue ribbon in my pocket all the way home, my thumb rubbing against the silky fabric, rehearsing how I would tell them. I imagined my mother framing it. I imagined my father nodding with that rare look of approval he usually saved for Ethan's report cards. We sat down for dinner. The pot roast was dry, as it always was on Tuesdays. I waited for a lull in the conversation. Mom, Dad, I said, my voice trembling with excitement. I won first place today. My mother looked up, her fork halfway to her mouth. That is nice. Tessa, pass the salt, please. She took the shaker and immediately turned to my brother. Ethan, tell your father what Coach Miller said about your practice today. Ethan lit up, launching into a detailed, exaggerated story about a goal he had almost scored during a scrimmage. My parents leaned in, their eyes shining. They asked follow-up questions. They analyzed his footwork. They discussed the potential for a scholarship, even though he was only 10. I sat there, clutching the blue ribbon in my pocket until the sweat from my palms stained the fabric darker. They never asked to see the drawing. They never asked what the prize was. By the time dessert was served, I realized that my victory was invisible because I was the one who had achieved it. That night taught me my first lesson in business. Value is subjective, and in the marketplace of my parents' affection, my stock was worthless. But the moment that truly hardened me, the moment that turned my sadness into a cold, burning ambition, happened when I was 14. It was late, past midnight. I had gone downstairs to get a glass of water. The door to my father's study was cracked open, a sliver of yellow light spilling onto the hallway floor. I heard the rustle of papers and the low murmur of serious discussion. We need to prioritize the college fund. My father said, the market is taking a hit. We cannot fully fund 2 private tuitions at this rate. I froze. I held my breath, pressing my back against the wall. Well, obviously we secure Ethan's fund first, my mother replied. There was no hesitation in her voice, no debate. Of course, my father agreed. Ethan has potential. He has the personality for business, the drive. He is an investment. And Tessa? My mother asked, though the tone suggested she already knew the answer. My father sighed. The sound of a man settling for less. Tessa is a good girl, but she is average. She will probably marry someone or find a quiet administrative job. She does not need the Ivy League. Investing in her is just throwing good money after bad. We will help her with community college. Maybe. But Ethan is the priority. Average? The word hung in the dark hallway like a verdict. It was worse than being called stupid. It was worse than being called lazy. Average meant I was not worth the effort. Average meant I was a bad bet. I walked back upstairs without my water. I lay in bed and stared at the ceiling until the sun came up. I did not cry. I think that was the night the part of me that wanted to please them died. In its place, something else was born, a machine fueled by pure, high-octane spite. From that day forward, I operated with the efficiency of a wartime economy. I stopped showing them my grades. I stopped inviting them to school events. I became a ghost in my own house. I worked like a dog. While Ethan was at soccer camps that cost $5,000 a summer, I was waiting tables at a diner on the edge of town. I took double shifts. I saved every penny. I studied while the other waitresses took smoke breaks. I maintained a 4.0 grade point average, not for my parents, but for the scholarship committees. When I was accepted into a top-tier university on a full academic scholarship, my parents were relieved rather than proud. It meant they did not have to spend a dime on me. They bought Ethan a new car for getting into a state school with mediocre grades. The divide became a canyon on graduation day. For Ethan, they rented a tent at the country club. There was a jazz band. There were catered hors d'oeuvres. My father gave a toast about the bright future of the Vaughn legacy. Ethan stood there in a suit he had not paid for, accepting praise for achievements he had not earned, looking every bit the successful man they projected onto him. For my graduation, 2 years later, we went to a chain Italian restaurant. Just the 4 of us. No party, no toasts. So, Tessa, my father said, chewing on a breadstick, you are really sticking with this property thing? Commercial real estate and hospitality management, I corrected him. He waved his hand dismissively. It sounds like a glorified landlady, or a restaurant hostess. Why didn't you study finance like your brother? That is where the real power is. I looked at him, I looked at Ethan, who was texting under the table, bored out of his mind. I like buildings, I said simply. I like things I can touch, things that are real. My father chuckled. Well, do not expect to get rich changing light bulbs for tenants. He had no idea. He had no idea that I had already closed my first deal. He had no idea that I had used my waitressing savings and a small loan to put a down payment on a distressed duplex during my senior year. He had no idea that I was not studying to be a landlady. I was studying to be an emperor. That dinner was the final test. I made a decision then and there. I would become successful. I would become wealthy beyond their comprehension. But I would never, ever let them know. I wanted to see it. I wanted to see the raw, unfiltered truth of how they treated me when they thought I was nothing. I wanted to document every sneer, every overlooked birthday, every condescending offer of $20. I wanted to build a dossier of their disrespect, because if I showed up in a Ferrari, they would love me for the Ferrari. They would respect the money, not the woman. And I did not want their transactional love. I chose commercial real estate because it is a brutal, bloodless sport. Buildings do not care if you are the favorite child. The market does not care about your parents' opinion. It only cares about yield, capitalization rates, and location. It was the only place where I could be judged solely on my merit. I spent my 20s in the trenches. I worked 80-hour weeks. I scouted locations at 3 in the morning. I negotiated with contractors who thought they could bully a young woman, and I learned to crush them with contracts so tight they could barely breathe. I learned the restaurant business from the dish pit to the balance sheet. I learned that a restaurant is not about food, it is about theater and logistics. I built my empire in the shadows. I created limited liability companies nested inside other limited liability companies. Vaughn Stone Capital was my fortress, and I was the invisible commander inside. Meanwhile, I watched Ethan flail. I watched him borrow money from our parents to start ventures that failed within 6 months. I watched him lease cars he could not afford to impress clients he could not close. And every time I saw him, he would look at my simple clothes and my quiet life and offer me pity. "Poor Tessa," he would say, "still struggling to find your way?" And I would smile, a sharp, private smile. Because I knew something he did not. I knew that the average girl owned the mortgage on his office. I knew that the struggling sister had a net worth that dwarfed the entire family estate. I sat in the dark corner of velour, watching him sweat in his suit, and I felt a cold, jagged satisfaction. He thought he was humiliated because the manager corrected him. He had no clue that the real humiliation was yet to come. I took another sip of my water. I did not grow up to be loved. Love is messy and unreliable. I grew up to never be looked down on again, and tonight, for the first time in 34 years, everyone in the room was finally looking up. The path from the invisible daughter to the owner of the city's most exclusive dining room began at a firm called Northbridge Venue Partners. To my parents, it was just a job. To me, it was boot camp. I started at the very bottom of the food chain as a junior analyst, a title that essentially meant I was responsible for everything no one else wanted to touch. While my friends were getting married or backpacking through Europe, I was clocking 60 to 70 hours a week in a windowless office, staring at spreadsheets until my eyes burned. I did not just learn the real estate business, I dissected it. I learned that a restaurant does not fail because the chef lacks vision. It fails because the rent-to-revenue ratio is off by 2%. I learned that the most important person in a building is not the landlord, but the head of maintenance, who knows which pipes are about to burst. I absorbed the rhythm of leases, the language of zoning laws, and the intricate, invisible machinery of commercial kitchens. I learned to spot the difference between a bad location and a misunderstood one. Most importantly, I learned about timing. In real estate, you make your money when you buy, not when you sell. You have to see value in the dust and the decay when everyone else only sees a demolition site. For 5 years, I lived like a monk. I drove a 10-year-old sedan. I rented a studio apartment the size of a closet. I ate instant noodles. And I saved. I saved every bonus, every commission, every tax refund. When I finally had enough capital, combined with a high-interest private loan that made my stomach churn every time I thought about it, I made my move. I did not buy a penthouse. I bought a derelict warehouse in the industrial district, a neighborhood that polite society avoided after dark. My father would have laughed at it. He would have called it a slum. I saw it as a shell with good bones and high ceilings. I converted it into a raw industrial event space and a food hall. 6 months later, the city announced a new transit line 2 blocks away. The value of my dirt tripled overnight. That was the first domino. I leveraged that equity to buy a failing bistro in Midtown, then a mixed-use complex in the suburbs. I was aggressive, but I was quiet. I did not want fame. Fame is a liability. Fame raises the price of the next deal. I wanted to be a ghost in the machine. I incorporated under the name Vaughn Stone Capital. It was a deliberate choice. It sounded established, heavy, and old. It sounded like the kind of firm my father would respect. A pillar of the establishment. It was an inside joke that only I understood. The name Vaughn was there, right on the letterhead, but my family was too busy looking at the surface of things to ever dig deep enough to find me. To them, I was just Tessa, the property manager who worked for some faceless corporation. They never asked who owned the corporation. They assumed I was a cog, not the engine. 3 years ago, The opportunity of a lifetime appeared. The building that housed Velour came onto the market. It was a historic property, a beautiful limestone structure that had been mismanaged for a decade. The previous owners were bleeding cash. They were trying to sell the restaurant brand and the real estate separately. I swooped in and bought both. I wanted total control. I wanted to own the experience from the foundation to the garnish on the plate. I poured millions into the renovation. I hired Miles. I poached the executive chef from New York. I curated every inch of the interior, but I made one rule absolute. I would remain anonymous. In the hospitality industry, the moment people know you are the owner, they stop telling you the truth. The staff performs for you, the customers suck up to you. I did not want a performance. I wanted excellence. So, I built a culture where the staff knew exactly who signed their checks. They respected me because I knew their jobs better than they did. But to the public, I was invisible. This allowed me to sit in my own restaurants, eat my own food, and hear what people really thought. I could spot a lazy server or a cold soup before the Yelp reviews even hit the web. It was the ultimate quality control. But my anonymity came with a side effect I had not anticipated. It created a blind spot for my brother. Ethan had discovered Velour about 6 months ago. He did not know I owned it. He just knew it was the place to be seen. He knew that getting a table here was a status symbol, a way to signal to his clients that he had arrived. I began receiving reports from my staff. They told me about a Mr. Vaughn who came in regularly. Initially, I thought nothing of it. He was a paying customer. But then the notes from the floor manager started to change. Mr. Vaughn demanded to bump a reservation for table 4. Mr. Vaughn complained that the wine list was pedestrian and demanded the reserve vintage without checking the price. Mr. Vaughn insinuated to the hostess that he is personal friends with the ownership group. That last one made my blood run cold. He was using our last name, my last name, to fabricate a connection. He was leveraging the ambiguity of Vaughn Stone Capital. He likely assumed the Vaughn in the company name referred to some distant, wealthy relative, or perhaps he just threw the name around hoping the staff would be too intimidated to check. It was classic Ethan. He built his life on borrowed prestige, but this time, he was borrowing from me without even knowing it, and he was damaging my brand. He was treating my staff like servants. He was being loud, obnoxious, and entitled in a space I had designed for elegance and discretion. 2 days ago, I was in San Francisco closing on a boutique hotel. I was supposed to stay until Friday. Then I got the notification from my executive assistant, Chloe. Ethan Vaughn has requested the prime table for Thursday night. He told the reservationist that it is critical for a deal and that he expects the family discount. Family discount. The phrase sat on my phone screen like an insult. There was no family discount at Velour. I paid full price when I ate here. My investors paid full price. I looked at my schedule. I looked at the flight options. I canceled my meetings in California. I booked the red-eye back. This was not just about protecting my staff anymore. This was about closure. I had spent my entire life being told that I was not enough, that I was the support staff to Ethan's superstar. I had built a fortress of success to prove them wrong, but I had kept the gates locked. I realized that as long as I hid my success, I was still playing by their rules. I was still that little girl in the hallway, afraid to disturb the heir apparent. Tonight was a test. I wanted to see how far he would go. I wanted to see if he would actually look me in the face and dismiss me in the very building I owned. I wanted to give him every opportunity to be decent, to be a brother, to be humble. But I knew Ethan. I knew he would take the rope and hang himself with it. When I walked in tonight and saw him holding court, performing his act of the big-shot billionaire, I felt a strange sense of calm. The anger was there, certainly, but it was cold, solid, and heavy. It was the weight of a sledgehammer before the swing. He had no idea that the average sister he mocked was the one reviewing the profit and loss statements. He had no idea that the chair he sat in, the wine he drank, and the walls that surrounded him were all assets on my balance sheet. I sat in my corner booth, watching Miles deliver the news, and I checked my phone. I had one more document ready to go. It was a lease agreement for a commercial office space in the financial district, the headquarters of Ethan's struggling venture capital firm. I had acquired that building 6 months ago as part of a portfolio package. I had noticed his company on the tenant roll immediately. His lease was up for renewal in 30 days. He had been dodging calls from the leasing office, assuming he could negotiate a better rate at the last minute. He thought he was a shark. He did not realize he was swimming in my tank. I took a breath. The look on his face when Miles revealed my identity was satisfying. Yes, but the real work was just beginning. He was going to finish his meal. He was going to pay his bill. And then, he was going to learn that his little sister did not just own his dinner. She owned his daylight hours, too. Ethan did not storm over to my table. Storming would have admitted defeat. Instead, he walked toward me with a stiff, brittle smile pasted onto his face, the kind of expression a politician wears right before a scandal breaks. He was trying to salvage the narrative, trying to shrink me back down into the little sister who needed $20 for a burger. He reached my booth and leaned in, placing both hands on the edge of the table. His knuckles were white. He lowered his voice to a hiss, shielding his words from the rest of the room, but I could smell the expensive wine on his breath and the desperation sweating through his pores. "You are enjoying this, aren't you?" he whispered, his eyes darting back to his table where his confused investors were watching us like hawks. "You think this is funny? Making a scene? I have 3 partners from the Sterling Group sitting there. Do not make me lose face. Tessa, do not do this to the family." I looked up at him, my expression unreadable. I took a slow, deliberate breath. "I am not doing anything. Ethan," I said softly, "I am sitting in my restaurant, drinking water. You are the one who tried to have the owner thrown out." He flinched. The word owner hit him like a physical blow. He shook his head, a quick, jerky motion of denial. "Stop saying that," he snapped. "You are not the owner. You are acting. I do not know who you slept with or what kind of con you are running, but I know you. I know you. Tessa, you are a mid-level manager at best. You do not own velours. You cannot afford the appetizers here." He was trying to rewrite reality in real time. It was a survival mechanism. If he acknowledged my success, he had to acknowledge his own mediocrity, and that was a psychological weight he could not bear. I leaned forward slightly, resting my chin on my hand. "Tell me, Ethan," I asked, my voice calm and deadly, "are you afraid of me? Or are you afraid of the truth?" He blinked, taken aback by the directness of the question. "I am afraid you are going to embarrass yourself," he muttered, though the conviction was draining out of his voice. At that moment, Miles returned to the table. He did not come empty-handed. He held a sleek, wireless payment terminal in his hand. He stepped between us, acting as a polished, impenetrable shield. "Mr. Vaughn," Miles said, his tone purely professional but laced with an undercurrent of steel. "Since you seem to be having trouble processing the chain of command, perhaps this will clarify the situation." Miles tapped the screen and turned the device toward Ethan. It was the back-end administrative view of the point-of-sale system. It showed the live revenue stream for the evening. At the top of the screen, in bold, undeniable letters, was the holding company that received the funds, Vaughn Stone Capital. And directly underneath, listed as the sole signatory and primary administrator, Tessa Vaughn. Ethan stared at the screen. He read the name. He read it again. I watched his eyes track the numbers, the gross revenue for the night, the weekly projections, numbers that I knew were higher than his firm's entire quarterly earnings. This is a glitch," Ethan stammered, pulling back as if the screen had burned him. "You just put her name there. Anyone can edit a profile." Miles withdrew the device with a sharp snap of his wrist. "Sir, this is a federally regulated banking interface," Miles said coldly. "We do not edit profiles for dramatic effect, and if you look toward the kitchen—" Miles gestured subtly. Ethan turned. Through the semi-open kitchen pass, the executive chef, a man who had been on the cover of culinary magazines, A man Ethan had praised loudly just 20 minutes ago caught my eye. He paused in the middle of plating a sea bass. He nodded to me, a deep, respectful bow of the head that he would never offer to a mere customer, no matter how rich. Then, two servers moving through the dining room paused to let me have the right of way in their line of sight, acknowledging me with silent, deferential nods. The room was speaking a language Ethan did not understand, but he could feel the vibration of it. The air around me was different. It was the air of authority. Ethan looked back at me, and for the first time, I saw genuine fear. It was the fear of a man realizing the ground he stood on was actually a trapdoor. "How?" he whispered. Where did you get the money? Mom and Dad said you were struggling." I did not correct them. I said, "It is amazing what you can accomplish when you are not busy trying to convince everyone else that you are important." Ethan swallowed hard. He straightened up, trying to regain some shred of dignity. "Fine. So you bought a restaurant. Congratulations. You got lucky on a crypto bet or something. That does not change anything. I am still the one dealing with institutional capital. I am the one building a legacy. This is just food." He turned to walk away, desperate to escape the gravity of my table. "Wait," I said. The command was soft, but it stopped him in his tracks. He turned back, impatient. "What? I have clients waiting." I picked up my phone. I unlocked it and tapped a specific folder. "You mentioned your legacy." I said, "You are operating out of the Metro Tower on 4th Street, correct?" Ethan frowned. "Yes. What does that have to do with you?" I tapped the screen. "You are on the 14th floor. Suite 1400, corner office facing the park." His frown deepened. "Yes." I smiled, but it did not reach my eyes. It is a beautiful building. I remember when I acquired it. The due diligence took 3 months. Ethan froze. The color drained from his face so fast it looked like a magic trick. "What did you say?" "I acquired it," I repeated, articulating every syllable. "I do not just own the place where you eat. Ethan, I own the place where you work." He shook his head. "No, that is Northbridge. The landlord is Northbridge Venue Partners. I signed the checks to them." I nodded. Northbridge is a subsidiary of Vaughan Stone Capital. It is a holding shell I use for commercial office space. I bought the entire portfolio last year. Ethan looked like he was going to be sick. The math was crashing down on him. The office he strutted around in, the boardroom where he played the big shot, the very carpet he walked on. It was all mine. He had been paying rent to me for 12 months. He had been funding the very sister he despised. I tapped send on my phone. A second later, a chime sounded from Ethan's jacket pocket. It was a loud, cheerful notification sound that cut through the tension. He reached into his pocket with a trembling hand. He pulled out his phone. He looked at the screen. It was a text from me. "I have read your office lease. Paragraph 4. Section B, regarding code of conduct in common areas. We need to talk." The phone slipped from his fingers. It didn't fall far, just fumbling against his chest before he caught it. But in the process, his other hand knocked into the silverware setting on the empty table next to us. A heavy steak knife clattered onto the tile floor with a ringing, metallic crash that sounded like a gunshot in the quiet dining room. Every head in the restaurant turned. At table 1, the 3 investors from the Sterling Group stood up halfway, alarmed. "Ethan," one of them called out, "is everything all right?" Ethan looked at them. Then he looked at me. He looked at the knife on the floor. He looked like a man who had just realized he was standing naked in front of a firing squad. He opened his mouth to speak, but nothing came out. His throat was dry. The arrogance was gone, replaced by the hollow, terrifying realization that I held his entire professional life in the palm of my hand. I picked up my glass of water again. "Go back to your table." "Ethan," I said, dismissing him. He did not move. He was paralyzed. "Your guests are waiting," I reminded him, "and that Bordeaux you ordered is $200 a bottle." I took a sip, looking over the rim of the glass. "Finish your meal," I said. "Do not waste a bill that you chose to run up." Ethan turned slowly. moving like an old man. He walked back to his table. His legs were unsteady. He sat down, and I watched as he tried to pick up his fork. His hand was shaking so badly that the silver tapped a nervous rhythm against the china plate. One of the investors leaned in and asked him something. Ethan shook his head, staring blankly at the tablecloth. I signaled Miles. "Bring me the dessert menu," I said. "I think I'm going to stay a little longer." The silence at table 1 was thick enough to choke on. Ethan was attempting to saw through his steak, but his movements were mechanical, jerky. His guests, the 3 partners from the Sterling Group, were no longer eating. They were exchanging glances, subtle, rapid movements of the eyes that communicated doubt far more effectively than words. They were wondering why the man they were about to trust with millions of dollars had just been dressed down by the restaurant manager and sent to his room like a naughty child. I watched it all from my corner booth. I had not touched the dessert menu yet. I was waiting for the second act. And right on cue, the double doors at the front of the restaurant swung open with a force that commanded attention. Gavin Rowe walked in. If I was the ghost in the machine of Vaughn's Stone Capital, Gavin was the neon sign out front. He was my public-facing partner, the man I sent into rooms when I needed charisma rather than calculation. He was 6'2", wore Italian suits that cost more than most people's annual rent, and had a voice that could sell sand in the desert. He was the deal maker, the energy, the shark that swam in the open water while I navigated the deep. He scanned the room, ignoring the hostess, and locked eyes with me immediately. He did not wave. He walked straight toward my table, his stride eating up the distance. He carried the energy of a man who had just won a war. "Tessa!" he boomed. His voice carried over the low hum of the dining room, shattering the polite atmosphere. He reached my booth and didn't bother sitting down. He slammed a leather folio onto the table, grinning like a predator who had just eaten. "We got it," he said, loud enough that half the restaurant turned to look. "The San Francisco deal closed 20 minutes ago. The wire transfer just hit the escrow account. $85 million, cash." At table 1, Ethan froze. The fork hovered halfway to his mouth. $85 million was a number that did not exist in Ethan's world. He dealt in hundreds of thousands, maybe $1 million on a good day. $85 million was institutional money. It was empire money. Gavin was not done, and the valuation on the retail portfolio just came back from the auditors. We are looking at a 30% increase in equity year over year. The portfolio has officially crossed the $500 million mark. Tess, we are not just players anymore. We are the house. Ethan dropped his fork. It hit the plate with a sharp clatter, but this time, he didn't even notice. He was staring at Gavin, and then he was staring at me. The color had not returned to his face since the text message, but now he looked positively gray. Gavin seemed to notice the audience for the first time. He turned slightly, his eyes landing on table 1. He saw Ethan staring. He saw the 3 men in suits gaping at us. Gavin was sharp. He recognized the look of men who smelled money. He flashed his $1 million smile, but it was edged with the cold steel of business. "Sorry to interrupt your dinner. Gentlemen," Gavin said, smoothing his tie, "just celebrating a little victory." He looked at Ethan more closely. He narrowed his eyes. "You look familiar," Gavin said. He tilted his head. "Wait, Vaughn, you are the tenant in the Metro Tower, right? Suite 1400? Ethan's mouth opened and closed like a fish on a dock. He knew who Gavin was. Everyone in local real estate knew who Gavin Rowe was. But Ethan had never put the pieces together. He had never realized that Gavin Rowe and Tessa Vaughn were 2 halves of the same whole. Yes, Ethan managed to choke out. "I am Ethan Vaughn." Gavin raised an eyebrow. He looked at Ethan. Then he looked down at me. "Vaughn?" Gavin asked, amusement dancing in his eyes. He pointed a thumb at Ethan. "Relative of yours, boss?" The word boss hung in the air. Gavin didn't call me that often, usually only when he wanted to annoy me, but tonight it was the final nail in the coffin of Ethan's ego. "We share parents," I said calmly. Gavin let out a short, sharp laugh. No kidding. Small world. He turned back to Ethan, his demeanor shifting from social to transactional in a split second. Well, since I have you here, Gavin said, stepping closer to Ethan's table, invading his space with the confidence of a landlord, we need to talk about that renewal on your suite. I was looking at the compliance report for the Metro Tower yesterday. Ethan scrambled. He tried to stand up, to meet Gavin at eye level, to regain some control before his clients heard too much. Oh, Gavin. Good to see you, Ethan said, his voice cracking. We can discuss business later. I am in the middle of a... Gavin cut him off. He didn't do it rudely. He just spoke over him with the weight of someone who had more zeros in his bank account. I just wanted to give you a heads up. Gavin continued, ignoring Ethan's attempt to silence him. The board, meaning Tessa and myself, is reconsidering the tenant mix on the 14th floor. We are thinking of converting that entire level into a high-end tech incubator. Your lease expires in 30 days, right? The three investors at Ethan's table were listening with rapt attention. This was not just gossip anymore. This was due diligence. They were watching their potential money manager being told, in public, that he might be evicted. Ethan was sweating profusely now. Beads of perspiration were gathering on his upper lip. We are confident about the renewal. Ethan lied, his eyes darting to his clients. I have been in talks with the leasing office. It is just a formality. We are an anchor tenant. Gavin looked confused. He looked at Ethan with genuine pity. Anchor tenant? Gavin repeated. You rent 3,000 square feet in a 40-story building. Ethan, you are not an anchor tenant. You are a rounding error. One of the investors, a gray-haired man with eyes like flint, cleared his throat. Excuse me, the investor said. He looked from Gavin to Ethan, and then he looked directly at me. Ethan, the investor said, his voice quiet but dangerous. You told us this morning that you had a long-term hold on your headquarters. You said the lease was secured for another 5 years. Ethan turned to the investor, his hands shaking as he held them up in a placating gesture. It is, Mike, it is, these guys, they are just negotiating. It is standard tactics. Standard tactics? Gavin laughed. It was a dry, humorless sound. Buddy, I wrote the termination notice this morning. It is sitting on your secretary's desk right now. You are out in 30 days unless you agree to a 40% rent hike to match the new market valuation, which, looking at your financials from the last audit, I do not think you can afford. The room was spinning for Ethan. I could see it. He was trying to catch a falling knife. And another thing, the investor named Mike said. He stood up slowly, wiping his mouth with a napkin and placing it on the table. You brought us here tonight, Mike said, gesturing around the room. You told us you knew the owner. You said you had the inside track on the hottest development deals in the city because of your connections. Ethan swallowed. I do know the owner. Mike pointed a finger at me. That woman, Mike said. That is the owner. Ethan nodded frantically. Yes, that is my sister. I told you. Mike stared at him. The look was not one of impressed realization. It was one of absolute disgust. If she is your sister, Mike said, articulating every word carefully, and if you are so close to the ownership, why did you try to have her thrown out by the security guard 20 minutes ago? The question hung there, vibrating in the air. It was the unanswerable question. It stripped away every layer of pretense Ethan had wrapped himself in. Ethan looked at me. His eyes were wide, pleading. He needed me to lie. He needed me to say it was a joke, a game, a sibling prank. He needed me to save him. I looked back at him. I took a sip of my water. I smiled. It was a small, polite smile. He is right. Ethan, I said softly, why did you do that? Ethan stammered. I did not know. I mean, I knew she was successful, but I didn't know she owned this specific... we keep our business separate. Stop, Mike said. He held up a hand. Just stop. Mike turned to his two partners. Gentlemen, I think we have seen enough. But the deal! Ethan cried out, his voice rising to a panic. The papers are ready to sign. We have the strategy meeting tomorrow. There is no meeting, Mike said. He picked up his jacket from the back of the chair. We do not do business with people who lie about their assets, and we certainly do not do business with men who are so insecure they have to humiliate their own family to feel big. Mike looked at me. He nodded, a gesture of respect that Ethan had never received from him. Ms. Vaughn, Mike said, my apologies for the disturbance. You have a lovely establishment. Thank you, I said. Gavin stepped aside to let the three investors pass. They walked out of the restaurant without looking back at Ethan. Ethan stood alone at the table. The bottle of expensive Bordeaux was unopened. The appetizers were untouched. His clients were gone. His lease was expiring, and the entire restaurant was watching him stand in the wreckage of his own making. Gavin walked back to my table and sat down opposite me. He picked up the dessert menu I had been ignoring. So, Gavin said casually, as if nothing had happened, are we celebrating the San Francisco deal? Or are we celebrating the fact that you just checkmated your brother in 4 moves? I looked at Ethan. He sank slowly into his chair, burying his face in his hands. Both, I said. Definitely both. News travels faster than light in the financial district of this city. By the time I poured my first cup of coffee at 6 o'clock the next morning, the story of what happened at Velour had already circulated through the morning briefings of every major firm in town. It was not the story Ethan would have wanted. If he had simply been exposed as less wealthy than he claimed, it might have been a minor embarrassment, something he could spin as a temporary liquidity issue. But the narrative that took hold was far more damaging. It was a story about character. The rumor mill did not care that he was renting his office or that his car was leased. They cared that he had tried to publicly humiliate a woman who turned out to be the most powerful person in the room. They cared that he had dragged his own family through the mud to elevate his fragile ego. In business, you can be ruthless, you can be aggressive, and you can even be difficult, but you cannot be a liability. And overnight, Ethan Vaughn had become a radioactive liability. My phone began buzzing at 7 o'clock. It was not Ethan yet. It was my network. A broker from a competing firm texted to ask if the rumors were true that I owned the Metro Tower. A commercial lender I had worked with for years sent a message simply saying, "Well played." I did not respond to any of them. Silence is a currency, and right now, mine was appreciating in value by the second. By 9 o'clock, the first domino fell for Ethan. I learned about it because I have friends in low places, specifically the executive assistants who manage the calendars of the city's elite. According to my source, Ethan had a scheduled pitch meeting with the Horizon Group at 10 o'clock. It was a deal he had been chasing for 6 months, a mid-sized capital injection that would have kept his lights on for another year. At 9:15, the Horizon Group secretary called Ethan's office. She did not offer to reschedule. She did not offer an excuse about a conflicting appointment. She simply stated that the partners felt the cultural alignment was no longer a fit. In the corporate world, cultural alignment is code for, "We think you are toxic." Ethan lost a $2 million verbal agreement before he even finished his morning commute. At 10:30, while I was reviewing the construction specs for a new site in the Marina District, I received a notification from my building management software. It was an alert from the security system at the Metro Tower. Tenant access log, Suite 1400, Conference Room A. I pulled up the live feed on my tablet. I did not need sound to know what was happening. Ethan was standing at the head of his conference table, his arms waving frantically. Seated around him were his 2 junior partners. They did not look happy. They looked like men who had just realized they were on a sinking ship and the captain was the one drilling holes in the hull. I could imagine the conversation. They were asking the questions they should have asked years ago. Who exactly is your sister? You said you had family money backing us, but does the family actually have money, or is it just her? What did you say to the Sterling Group that made them walk out before the appetizers arrived? Ethan was pacing. He was pointing at his phone, likely trying to show them some fabricated proof of his stability, but body language does not lie. His partners were leaning away from him, arms crossed, protecting their own interests. The illusion of Ethan Vaughn. The golden boy with the golden connections was dissolving under the harsh fluorescent lights of an office he did not own. It was time for the second blow. I did not want to destroy him out of malice. I wanted to dismantle his entitlement with the cold, hard machinery of the law. I opened my laptop and drafted an email. I did not send it from my personal account. I sent it from the General Counsel of Northbridge Venue Partners. Subject: Notice of Lease Expiration and Compliance Inspection. The email was standard boilerplate, the kind of bureaucratic nightmare that keeps business owners awake at night. It stated that the lease for Suite 1400 would expire in 29 days. It outlined the new terms for renewal: a 40% increase in base rent, an increase in the security deposit equal to 6 months of occupancy costs, and a mandatory personal guarantee from all managing partners. That personal guarantee was the killer. It meant that if the business failed, I could come after their houses, their cars, and their personal savings. Ethan's partners would never sign it. They would force him out before they risked their own assets for his mistakes. But I added one more thing. I added a notification for a compliance and safety inspection scheduled for Monday morning at 8 o'clock. Commercial leases are full of clauses that tenants rarely read. One of them allows the landlord to inspect the premises for code violations, unauthorized alterations, or misuse of space at any time with 24 hours of notice. I knew Ethan had installed a private wine fridge and a humidor in his office without pulling a permit or asking for approval. I knew he had changed the locks on the executive suite without sending a key to security. These were minor infractions, technically, but in a lease dispute, they were grounds for immediate eviction and forfeiture of the deposit. I hit send. The reaction was almost instantaneous. At 11 o'clock, my phone lit up with Ethan's name. I let it ring. He called again at 11:02 and again at 11:05. Then came the texts. Tess, pick up. It is important. Tessa, I know you are seeing this. Stop playing games. I just got an email from your management company. 40%? Are you insane? We cannot absorb that kind of overhead. Tessa, please. The partners are freaking out. You need to call off the dogs. Tell them to waive the personal guarantee. I watched the messages scroll down my lock screen. The tone shifted with every passing hour. He went from commanding to bargaining, and finally, to begging. I am sorry about dinner, okay? I was stressed. I didn't mean it. We are family. Tess, you cannot evict your own brother. Please. I did not reply. Responding would give him a foothold. It would turn this into a negotiation between siblings, and he was an expert at manipulating that dynamic. He knew how to bully little sister Tessa, but he did not know how to negotiate with Tessa Vaughn, CEO of Vaughn Stone Capital. By remaining silent, I forced him to deal with the entity, not the person. I forced him to face the reality that he was just a tenant who had annoyed a very powerful landlord. By early afternoon, the ripples had reached the shore of my parents' house. I had not spoken to my mother in 3 months, and my father in 5. Our relationship consisted of obligatory holiday cards and the occasional stiff dinner where they talked about Ethan's potential and my lack thereof. But at 2 o'clock, my mother called. I stared at the screen. The contact photo was a picture of her and Ethan at a country club brunch. I was not in the photo. I let it go to voicemail. 5 minutes later, my father called. I let that go to voicemail too. Then the text came from my mother. Tessa, Aunt Linda called me. She said she heard something about you and Ethan at a restaurant last night. She said people are saying you own the building. What is going on? Ethan sounds hysterical. Call us immediately. They were panicked, not because they were proud that their daughter was a property mogul. They were panicked because the hierarchy of the family was being upended. If I was the owner and Ethan was the tenant, then their entire worldview, the belief that Ethan was the special one and I was the safety net, was a lie. They were not calling to congratulate me. They were calling to fix the glitch in their matrix. They wanted me to stand down so Ethan could stand up. I put my phone on Do Not Disturb. I spent the rest of the afternoon in meetings. I reviewed architectural drawings. I authorized a budget increase for a roofing project. I fired a contractor who was cutting corners on safety. I worked with the cool, calm efficiency that had gotten me here. I did not let the drama penetrate the walls of my office. But as the sun began to set, painting the city skyline in shades of burnt orange and violet, I allowed myself a moment of reflection. I opened the security feed for the Metro Tower one last time. It was 7 o'clock in the evening. The office lights in Suite 1400 were off, except for one. Ethan was not in his office. He was down in the parking garage. The camera feed was grainy, but I recognized him instantly. He was sitting in his silver luxury sedan, the car he leased for $1,200 a month to look like a winner. He was just sitting there. The engine was off. His hands were gripping the steering wheel, his forehead resting against his knuckles. He looked small, surrounded by the concrete pillars of the structure I owned, parked on the pavement I paid to maintain, under the lights I paid to power. He looked incredibly small. I zoomed in slightly. He had his phone propped up on the dashboard. The screen was glowing. I could not see the details, but I knew what he was looking at. He was looking at the website for Velour. He was looking at the reviews. He was looking at the press page where articles described the visionary ownership behind the revitalization of the historic district. He was looking at the door he had kicked the night before, realizing too late that it was the entrance to the only shelter he had left, and he was realizing that he had burned it down because he was too proud to knock. He sat there for a long time, alone in the dark, trapped in a box of his own making. I closed the laptop. I picked up my purse and walked out of my office. I had a dinner reservation at a small, quiet bistro across town, a place where nobody knew my name and where the food tasted like honesty. Ethan would have to figure out his own way home. I had carried the weight of his expectations for 34 years. Today, I set it down. I did not have to wait long for the inevitable family summit. It happened 48 hours after the dinner service that dismantled my brother's ego. It was a Tuesday night, usually a quieter evening at Velour, but we were fully booked thanks to the sudden surge of interest in the mystery owner who had taken down a finance bro in public. I was in the kitchen, tasting a new saffron reduction with the chef, when Miles appeared at my elbow. He did not look flustered. Miles never looked flustered, but there was a tightness around his eyes that signaled trouble. "Your parents are at the front desk, Madame," he said quietly. "They do not have a reservation. They are insisting on seeing you. The hostess is trying to be polite, but your father is beginning to raise his voice." I set down the tasting spoon. The rich metallic taste of saffron lingered on my tongue, a sharp contrast to the sour feeling rising in my stomach. "Do not let them into the main dining room," I said. "I will come to the front. Prepare the Onyx Room." The Onyx Room was our most private dining space, a soundproof vault designed for high-stakes negotiations and celebrity breakups. It was the only place suitable for what was about to happen. I walked to the front of the house. I could hear my father before I saw him. He was using his head-of-the-household voice, a tone that had terrified me when I was 6, but now just sounded like a man shouting at a storm he could not control. "I am her father," he was saying to Sarah, "my young hostess. You do not tell me to wait. You go back there and tell Tessa to get out here right now." Sarah looked relieved when she saw me approaching. "It is all right, Sarah," I said, stepping between my father and my employee. "I will handle this." My mother and father turned to look at me. They looked older than I remembered. My mother was clutching her purse with both hands, her knuckles white. My father's face was flushed, a vein pulsing in his temple. They did not look like the confident, dismissive parents of my childhood. They looked desperate. "Hello, Dad. Hello, Mom," I said. "Tessa," my mother started, her voice trembling. "How could you?" "Not here." I cut her off. My voice was low but absolute. "We are not doing this in the lobby. Follow me." I did not wait for them to agree. I turned and walked toward the Onyx Room. I heard their footsteps following me, heavy and hesitant. It was a small reversal of power, but a significant one. For my entire life, I had followed them, followed their rules, followed their schedule, followed in Ethan's shadow. Now, they were walking in my wake. I opened the heavy door to the private room and gestured for them to sit. The room was stark and elegant, dominated by a black marble table. I did not sit. I stood at the head of the table, placing my hands on the cool stone. "You have 5 minutes," I said. "I have a business to run." My father sat down heavily. He looked around the room, taking in the expensive art on the walls, the crystal decanters on the sideboard. He seemed to be trying to reconcile the luxury of the room with the daughter he had written off as mediocre. "You need to stop this, Tessa," he said. He did not ask, he commanded. "This game you are playing with Ethan, it ends now." "It is not a game," I replied. "It is a lease agreement and a compliance check. Those are legal realities, not games." "You are ruining him!" my mother cried out. Tears were already spilling onto her cheeks. She was wearing a coat I recognized from 10 years ago. I realized then that the image of wealth they projected was just as fragile as Ethan's. He has lost the Horizon deal. His partners are threatening to leave. If you evict him, the company collapses. "Then perhaps he should have run a better company," I said. "Or perhaps he should not have insulted his landlord in front of his investors." My father slammed his hand on the table. The crystal glasses rattled. "Don't you dare speak about him like that. You are his sister. Family helps family. That is the rule. You are being selfish. Tessa, you have always been selfish, hiding away, doing, whatever this is." He waved his hand at the room as if my success was an act of betrayal. "Selfish?" I repeated the word. I let it hang in the air. I walked over to the sideboard and poured myself a glass of water. I did not offer them any. "Let us talk about family helping family," I said, turning back to face them. "I remember when I was 8 years old, and I won the district art prize. You put the ribbon in a drawer and spent dinner talking about Ethan's soccer practice. Was that family helping family?" My mother blinked, confused by the sudden shift to the past. "That was years ago. Tessa, what does that have to do with—" "I remember when I was 14, I continued, my voice steady, "and I heard you in the study. You said Ethan was an investment. You said I was average. You said spending money on my education was throwing good money after bad." My father's face went pale. He remembered. I could see it in his eyes. We were being practical," he stammered. "The market was down. We had to make hard choices." "And you made your choice," I said. "You bet on Ethan. You gave him the tutors, the camps, the car, the down payment for his first condo. You gave me nothing, and I am not complaining about the money. I am glad you gave me nothing. It made me hungry. It made me sharp. But you cannot tell me I am selfish for not sharing a harvest that I planted, watered, and reaped entirely on my own." My mother looked down at her hands. "We loved you, Tessa. We just thought—" "You thought I would not amount to anything." I finished the sentence for her. "You thought I would be a secretary or a housewife. You thought I was safe to ignore." I leaned forward, looking at my father. "And now, the investment you made, the golden boy, is failing. And the bad asset, the average daughter, owns the building he is failing in, and that terrifies you." My father looked away. He could not meet my gaze. "It is not just his company," my mother whispered. Her voice was so quiet I almost missed it. I looked at her. "What did you say?" My mother looked up, and her face was a mask of pure terror. "It is not just his company. Tessa," she repeated, her voice breaking. "We gave him the money." I froze. "What money?" "The retirement fund," she sobbed. "The 401k accounts, the equity from the house. We liquidated everything last year. Ethan said he had a sure thing. He said he could triple it in 3 years. He said we would retire in luxury." I felt a cold chill run down my spine. I looked at my father. He was staring at the table, a broken man. "You gave him everything?" I asked. "Every dollar?" My father nodded slowly. "He is our son. He said he needed capital to scale up. He promised. He promised because he is a gambler." I said, my voice rising for the first time. "He is not an investor. He is a gambler who plays with other people's chips. And you gave him your life savings? The room was silent, save for my mother's jagged breathing. This changed everything. This was not just about teaching Ethan a lesson anymore. This was about the fact that my parents, in their blind favoritism, had walked off a financial cliff. If Ethan's company went under, they would be destitute. They would lose their home. They would be 70 years old with zero assets. My father looked up at me. His eyes were red. You have to save him. Tessa, he pleaded. The arrogance was gone. Now, it was just fear. If you enforce the lease, if you demand the personal guarantee, he goes bankrupt. And if he goes bankrupt, we lose everything. Please, do not be selfish. Just this once. I looked at them. I looked at the parents who had ignored me for 3 decades. I looked at the people who had called me average. They were asking me to use my success, the success they had mocked, to bail out the brother who had bullied me. They wanted me to write a check to cover their bad bet. I took a deep breath. I thought about the 60-hour weeks. I thought about the instant noodles. I thought about the risk I took on that first warehouse. No, I said. My mother gasped. Tessa! I will not save his company. I said firmly, Northbridge Venue Partners will proceed with the lease enforcement. Ethan is a liability. He is a bad tenant and a worse businessman. If I bail him out now, he will just lose the money again in 6 months. I do not throw good money after bad. My father stood up, his face twisting in anger. So you are going to let us starve? You are going to put your parents on the street? I held up a hand. Sit down, I said. He hesitated, then sat. I said I will not save his company. I continued. I did not say I would let you starve. I pulled out my phone. I opened my calendar. I am not going to give Ethan a dime, I said, but I am not going to let you lose your house. I am willing to buy out your position in Ethan's fund. They looked at me, confused. What? My father asked. I will buy the debt. I explained. I will pay you the principal amount you invested with him. I will write you a check for exactly what you gave him. You will get your retirement money back. My mother started to cry again, this time with relief. Oh, Tessa, thank you, thank you. But, I added, my voice cutting through her gratitude, there are conditions. I walked over to the door and placed my hand on the handle. First, the money goes into a trust managed by a third party. You do not get access to the lump sum. You get a monthly stipend. I will not let you hand it back to Ethan to lose again. My father opened his mouth to object, but I silenced him with a look. Second, I said, Ethan is done. I want him out of my building. I want him out of real estate. And I want a full admission of what he did. What do you mean? My father asked. I mean he's going to learn the one thing you never taught him. I said, consequences. I opened the door. Go home, I said. I will have my lawyers draft the paperwork. Do not come to my restaurant without a reservation again. My parents stood up. They looked at me. Really looked at me. For the first time, they did not see the average daughter. They saw the person who held the deed to their future. They walked out of the room in silence. I watched them go. I did not feel triumphant. I felt exhausted. I had just bought my parents' safety, but I knew I could never buy their genuine respect. They respected the checkbook, not the hand that held it. But as I walked back to the kitchen, I realized that was okay. I did not need them to be proud of me. I just needed them to know that when the roof caved in, I was the only one who could hold it up. I found Miles in the hallway. He looked at me with a question in his eyes. Is everything resolved, Madame? He asked. I nodded. Yes, Miles. I said, the bill has been settled. I placed a heavy blue leather folder on the center of the black marble table. The sound it made against the stone was solid and final, like a judge's gavel. My parents flinched at the noise. They were sitting on the edge of their chairs, looking at the document as if it were a bomb that might detonate at any moment. This is not a suggestion, I said, my voice stripped of any familial warmth. This is a binding term sheet. It is a settlement offer constructed by my general counsel over the last hour. My father reached for his reading glasses. His hands were shaking slightly. He opened the folder and stared at the dense paragraphs of legal text. I watched his eyes scan words like liquidation, asset purchase, and irrevocable trust. He looked up at me, bewildered. This was not the language of a daughter helping her father. This was the language of a corporate takeover. I will explain it in plain English, I said, taking a seat at the head of the table. I am offering to purchase the remaining viable assets of Ethan's company, specifically, his client list, excluding the ones he has already alienated, and the leasehold improvements on the office space he occupies in my building. I am buying them at fair market value. My mother perked up, hope flooding her eyes. So you are buying his company? You are saving him? No, I corrected her sharply. I am stripping the car for parts before it crashes. I am buying the assets. But the purchase price, which amounts to $1.2 million, will not go to Ethan. I tapped the page with my index finger. Look at Clause 3, Subsection A. The funds will be wired directly into a secure trust fund for the benefit of Robert and Martha Vaughn. My parents stared at me. That is your money, I said. That is the retirement you gave him. I am buying his failure so that I can give you back your future. Ethan does not touch a cent of this transaction. He walks away with zero debt to the company, but he also walks away with zero cash. My father frowned, his brow furrowing. But he needs operating capital. If you take the assets and give the money to us, how does he restart? How does he pay his rent? He does not, I said. That brings us to Clause 4. I turned the page for them. Clause 4 was the eviction notice, repackaged as a voluntary lease termination. Ethan surrenders the office by Friday, I explained. He vacates the premises. The company is dissolved. He is done playing CEO in my tower. My father looked like he wanted to argue, but the reality of the situation was pressing down on him. He looked at the number, $1.2 million. It was their life raft. If he argued for Ethan, he drowned himself and my mother. And there are non-monetary conditions, I added. I pointed to the final page. Ethan must sign a perpetual non-association agreement. He is legally forbidden from using the name Vaughn Stone Capital, or my name, or implying any familial or professional connection to any of my entities for the purpose of business development. If he tells a waiter, a client, or a valet attendant that he knows the owner, he owes me $10,000 per infraction. My mother gasped, Tessa, that is cruel. He is your brother. You cannot forbid him from saying he knows you. I can, and I will. I replied, I am protecting my brand. Ethan has proven that his association is toxic. I am quarantining the contamination. And finally, I said, leaning back, there is the public statement. I slid a separate sheet of paper across the table. It was a drafted press release, short and surgical. I, Ethan Vaughn, admit to misrepresenting my professional standing and financial backing to secure client contracts. I acknowledge that I have no operational ties to Vaughn Stone Capital and that any previous claims were made in error. I am stepping down to rectify these ethical lapses. I looked my father in the eye. His career is already dead. Dad, the Sterling Group walked out. Horizon canceled. The rumors are already circulating. This statement allows him to control the narrative. It lets him say he is stepping down to fix ethical lapses rather than being sued for fraud. This is me offering him a parachute. It is a small, ugly parachute, but it is better than hitting the ground at terminal velocity. My father opened his mouth to shout, to use his old authority, to tell me I was being an ungrateful child, but then he looked at the check amount again. He looked at my mother's terrified face, and he realized that the person sitting across from him was not the girl who asked for permission. I was the institution. I am not asking you to like it, I said quietly. I am telling you this is the only deal on the table. Take it, and you retire in comfort. Leave it, and you lose your house when Ethan's creditors come calling next month. The door to the Onyx room opened. Ethan walked in. He looked like a man who had aged 10 years in 24 hours. His suit was rumpled. His tie was loose. The arrogant shine was gone from his hair and his eyes. He looked at our parents. Then he looked at me. He saw the files on the table. "Miles told me to come here," Ethan said, his voice raspy. "He said there was a settlement." I gestured to the empty chair opposite me. "Sit down, Ethan." He sat. He did not slouch. He collapsed into the chair. He picked up the document my father pushed toward him. He read it in silence. The room was so quiet, I could hear the hum of the wine fridge in the corner. He got to the part about the money going to the trust. His jaw tightened. "You are bypassing me?" he asked, looking up with a flash of his old anger. "You are buying my assets but paying Mom and Dad? That is illegal. That is my company." "It is a distressed asset sale," I said calmly. "And since your company owes a significant debt to your primary investors, Mom and Dad, I am simply structuring the payout to satisfy the priority creditors first. It is perfectly legal. My lawyers made sure of it." He read further. He got to the admission statement. "I am not signing this," he spat, tossing the paper onto the marble. "I am not admitting to fraud. I will sue you. I will sue you for defamation. I will tell everyone you are trying to steal my business." I did not flinch. I did not raise my voice. I simply interlaced my fingers and rested them on the table. "You want to sue me?" I asked. "With what money?" "Ethan, you have $12,000 in your operating account. My retainer for my legal team is $50,000 a month. I will bury you in paperwork before you even get a court date." Ethan looked at our parents. "Mom? Dad? Are you going to let her do this? She is blackmailing me." My father looked at his son. He looked at the son he had worshipped, the son he had invested everything in, and for the first time, he saw the desperation and the incompetence. He saw a man who had squandered a fortune and was now asking for more. My father closed his eyes. "Sign the papers, Ethan," my father whispered. Ethan looked as if he had been slapped. "What?" "Sign the papers," my father said, his voice stronger this time, laced with a bitter resignation. "We need the money. Son, we cannot lose the house. You lost our money. Tessa is getting it back." Ethan looked at his mother. She was weeping silently into a handkerchief, unable to look at him. He turned back to me. His eyes were wild, searching for a weakness, searching for the little sister he could bully. "You are enjoying this," he sneered. "You planned this whole thing. You set me up." "I did not set you up," I said. "I set a table. You are the one who sat down and ordered a meal you could not pay for." I pushed a black fountain pen across the marble. It slid smoothly and stopped exactly within his reach. "You have two choices. Ethan, option A. You walk out of here. I evict you on Monday. I sue you for breach of lease. Your investors sue you for misrepresentation. Mom and Dad lose their home. You go bankrupt, and you likely face an investigation by the Securities and Exchange Commission." I paused, letting the weight of that reality settle on his shoulders. "Option B. You sign, you admit you lied, you walk away with a clean slate, no debt, and the knowledge that you didn't destroy our parents' lives. You lose your pride, but you keep your freedom." Ethan stared at the pen. His hand was trembling. It was a subtle tremor at first. Then it grew until his whole arm was shaking. He was fighting a war inside his head, the delusion of his grandeur against the brutal wall of my success. He looked at the room. This was the Onyx Room at Velour, the most exclusive table in the city. Yesterday, he had tried to kick me out of this building. Today, he was surrendering his life to me inside it. He picked up the pen. He hesitated. "Tessa," he said, his voice breaking. "Please, the admission statement. Can we change the wording? Can we just say I am pursuing other opportunities?" I looked at him cold. "No," I said. "Why?" he pleaded. "Why do you need me to say I was unethical?" "Because," I said, leaning in close, my voice barely a whisper, "I need you to understand that words have a price. You spent 30 years using words to make me feel small. You used words to take our parents' money. You used words to lie to your clients. Today, you are going to use words to tell the truth." I pointed to the signature line. Do you want to lose everything, Ethan? Or do you want to learn how to respect the person who is saving you? He held my gaze for a second, hate and fear warring in his eyes. Fear won. He bent his head. He pressed the pen to the paper. He signed. The scratching sound of the nib against the paper was loud in the silence. He signed the asset sale. He signed the trust transfer. He signed the lease termination. And finally, with a hand that shook so hard the signature was barely legible, he signed the admission of misconduct. He dropped the pen. He did not look up. I reached out and gathered the papers. I checked every signature. They were valid. I placed them back in the blue folder and closed it. I stood up. "Thank you," I said. I looked at my parents. "The money will be in the trust by Friday morning. You will receive your first stipend check on the 1st of the month." I looked at Ethan. "You have until 5 o'clock on Friday to clear out your desk. Leave the keys with security. If you are not gone by 5, I will have your personal effects put on the curb." I turned and walked toward the door. "Tessa," my mother called out. Her voice was weak. Are we still a family?" I stopped with my hand on the doorknob. I did not turn around. "That depends," I said. "Depends on what?" she asked. I opened the door, letting the sounds of the busy restaurant, the clinking of glasses, the laughter of paying customers, flood into the silent, suffocating room. "It depends on whether you are looking for a daughter," I said, "or just another loan officer." I walked out and closed the door behind me, leaving them in the expensive silence I had paid for. The days following the signing of the settlement were quiet, but it was the silence of a structure that had already collapsed. The dust was just settling. Ethan had vacated Suite 1400 by Friday afternoon. He did not cause a scene. He did not shout at the security guards. He simply packed 3 cardboard boxes, handed his keycard to the building manager, and walked out of the Metro Tower into the blinding sunlight of a career he had incinerated. I thought that would be the end of it. I thought the transaction was closed. But the real currency in business is not money. It is reputation. And reputation is a sticky, pervasive thing. Ethan thought he had lost his company because I was vindictive. He thought he lost the deal with the Sterling Group because of a bad dinner service. But in the days that followed, he was forced to confront a much uglier truth. He did not lose because he was broke. He lost because he had shown the world exactly who he was, and the world did not like what it saw. I heard about the text message from a mutual acquaintance, a man named Marcus, who had worked with Ethan at his first firm years ago. Marcus was one of the few people Ethan respected, a senior broker with a reputation for absolute integrity. Apparently, Ethan had reached out to him on Saturday, looking for a lifeline. He had sent a message asking for a job, playing the victim, claiming that his crazy sister had sabotaged his company out of jealousy. Marcus did not offer him a job. He did not offer him sympathy. He sent back a reply that reportedly circulated through the downtown happy hour circuit like wildfire. "Ethan, I was at the table next to you on Thursday. I heard what you said to her. If you are willing to humiliate your own sister in front of strangers just to look big, what would you do to a partner when the margins get tight? Do not call me again." That message must have been the final blow. It was the mirror Ethan had been avoiding for 34 years. It told him that his failure was not financial, it was moral. On Tuesday morning, my executive assistant, Chloe, buzzed my intercom. "Mr. Ethan Vaughn is here," she said. Her voice was guarded. "He does not have an appointment. I told him he could not just walk in." I paused. My first instinct was to have him removed. He had signed the papers. He had no business here. But then I hesitated. "Is he causing a scene?" I asked. "No," Chloe said, sounding surprised. "He is sitting in the waiting area. He said he is happy to wait for the next available slot. He said to tell you he is here as a visitor, not a brother." I looked at my schedule. I had a 15-minute window before a site inspection. "Send him in," I said. Ethan walked into my office. It was the first time he had ever stepped foot inside the headquarters of Vaughn Stone Capital. I watched his eyes travel over the space. He took in the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city skyline. the same skyline he used to claim he owned. He looked at the minimalist furniture, the architectural models on the side table, the quiet, undeniable atmosphere of established power. He looked different. The expensive suit was gone, replaced by a simple button-down shirt and slacks. He looked tired. He looked like a man who had not slept since the ink dried on the settlement papers. I did not stand up. I remained seated behind my desk, my hands folded on top of a stack of blueprints. "You have 10 minutes, Ethan," I said. He nodded. He did not argue. He did not try to charm me. He walked over to the chair opposite my desk and sat down, keeping his hands in his lap. "I did not come here to ask for money," he said. His voice was low, lacking the performative boom he used to affect. "And I did not come here to ask for the company back. I know that is gone." "Then why are you here?" I asked. He looked down at his hands, then back up at me. "I met Marcus for coffee this morning," he said. "After he sent me that text, I begged him to explain. I told him I was just joking that night. I told him it was just sibling rivalry." "And?" He looked at me like I was a stranger. He told me that decent men do not treat people like stepping stones. He told me that I looked small. Ethan swallowed hard. "I have spent my whole life thinking I was the big man. Tessa, Mom and Dad. They told me I was the son. They told me everything revolved around me, and I believed them. I thought I was big because I made you feel small." He paused, and for the first time in my life, I saw his eyes fill with tears that were not manipulative. They were the tears of a man grieving his own self-image. "I am sorry," he whispered. "Not for the deal, not for the money. I am sorry for what I said at the restaurant. I am sorry that I made you feel like you didn't belong in your own house." I watched him. I analyzed him. In business, you learn to spot the difference between a client who is sorry they missed a payment and a client who is sorry they got caught. Ethan was both. He was devastated that he had been caught, yes, but he was also realizing that the game he had been playing, the game where he was the prince and I was the peasant, was a fantasy. "I appreciate the apology, Ethan," I said. My voice was even. It was not warm. It was the voice of a judge accepting a plea. He leaned forward slightly. "How did you do it?" he asked. The question burst out of him, desperate and sincere. "How did you build all of this?" "We grew up in the same house. We had the same start." "Actually, I had a better start. I had the tutors. I had the capital. I had the encouragement. You had nothing." He looked around the office again, shaking his head. "I had every advantage, and I failed. You were invisible, and you built an empire. I do not understand." I leaned back in my chair. The leather creaked softly. "You are right," I said. "You had every advantage, and that is exactly why you failed." He frowned, confusion knitting his brow. "You were never hungry. Ethan," I said, "you were never afraid. When you fell off your bike, Dad picked you up. When you failed a test, Mom blamed the teacher. When you needed money, they wrote a check. You lived in a world with a safety net so thick you could bounce on it. You never learned to walk on the high wire because you never thought you could fall." I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the city I had conquered block by block. "I did not have a net," I said, my back to him. "I had a precipice. When I was 14 and I heard them call me average, I realized that if I fell, no one was going to catch me. In fact, they probably wouldn't even notice I was gone." I turned back to face him. "I succeeded because I had to survive. Ethan, I learned to read contracts because no one was going to read them for me. I learned to value money because I didn't have any. I learned to build things because the home I lived in didn't have room for me." Ethan looked down. He was twisting his watch band, a nervous habit I hadn't seen since we were children. I thought, he started, then stopped. I thought that because they loved you less, it meant you were worth less. "That is the lie they taught you," I said, "and you bought it. You thought love was a limited resource, and if you hoarded it all, you won. But you didn't win. Ethan, you just became dependent. You became a 34-year-old man who still needed his parents to validate his existence." He flinched. The truth was a physical blow. "I want to fix it," he said softly. He looked up at me, his eyes pleading. I signed the papers. I admitted everything. I am starting over. I am going to get a real job. Entry level. Marcus gave me a lead on a junior analyst position at a logistics firm. "That is good," I said. "Can we—" He hesitated. "Can we start over too? Can I be your brother again? Not the golden child, just your brother." I looked at him. I looked at the man who had mocked my clothes, who had tried to kick me out of my own restaurant, who had spent decades standing on my shoulders to make himself feel tall. I saw the regret. I believed it was real. But I also knew that scars do not disappear just because the person holding the knife says sorry. In business, when a partnership becomes toxic, you dissolve it. You can settle the debts. You can shake hands at the end, but you do not go back into business together. I walked back to my desk and sat down. "We can be polite. Ethan," I said, "if we see each other at Christmas, we can talk about the weather. If you need a reference for that entry-level job, I will verify that you are capable of hard work when you have no other choice." His face fell. He understood what I was saying. "But we cannot go back," I continued gently. "I cannot unhear what you said. I cannot unknow that you were willing to destroy me to impress 3 strangers. You showed me your character, Ethan, and character is the one thing you cannot renegotiate." He sat there for a long moment. He looked at the door, then back at me. He nodded slowly. "I understand," he said. He stood up. He looked smaller than when he walked in, but he also looked more real. He wasn't the fake tycoon anymore. He was just a man with a lot of regrets and a very steep hill to climb. "Goodbye, Tessa," he said. "Goodbye, Ethan," I replied. He walked to the door. He paused for a second, his hand on the frame, as if he wanted to say one more thing, but he realized there was nothing left to say. He walked out. I waited until the door clicked shut, then I pressed the button on my intercom. "Chloe," I said. "Yes, Ms. Vaughn? Please schedule a meeting with the property management team for the Metro Tower." I said, "I want to discuss the renovation of the 14th floor." "Yes, ma'am." I turned back to my blueprints. I had a business to run, and for the first time in my life, the view from the top didn't feel lonely. It felt clean. Friday afternoon arrived with the heavy, finalized silence of a courtroom after the verdict is read. We were back in the conference room at my headquarters. The sun was cutting sharp angles across the mahogany table, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air, the only things in the room that were moving freely. Ethan sat across from me. To his left sat our parents. They looked exhausted, diminished, like people who had survived a natural disaster but lost all their heirlooms in the flood. The stack of documents in the center of the table was thick. The trust fund was established. The asset purchase agreement was executed. The lease termination was notarized. Ethan put the cap back on his pen. He let out a long, shuddering breath. The sound of a man who believes the worst is finally behind him. He looked at me, and I saw a flicker of relief in his eyes. He had lost his company. Yes, he had lost his reputation in the city, certainly, but he had kept his freedom. He had kept his parents' retirement intact. He believed he had managed to salvage a temporary truce from total defeat. "I think we are done," Ethan said, his voice quiet. "I will have the keys to the office on your desk by 5 o'clock. He began to push his chair back, ready to stand up, ready to walk out and begin the long, slow process of forgetting this week ever happened. "Sit down, Ethan," I said. My voice was not loud, but it stopped him instantly. He froze, hovering halfway between sitting and standing. He looked at me, and the relief in his eyes evaporated, replaced by a sudden, sharp wariness. "What?" he asked. "I signed everything. The deal is done." "The deal regarding the settlement is done." I agreed. I opened a separate, thin folder that had been sitting under my hand the entire time. I slid a single sheet of paper across the table toward him. "But we have not discussed the penalty clause in your original lease," I said. Ethan frowned. He sat back down slowly. "What are you talking about? The lease is terminated. You just watched me sign the termination." I nodded. I terminated the lease moving forward, but this document concerns a breach of contract that occurred 3 days ago. I pointed to the paper. It was a photocopy of an email chain, but attached to the top was a printed transcript from the reservation system at Velour, alongside a sworn affidavit from Miles, my general manager. Ethan picked it up. His eyes scanned the page, and the blood drained from his face so completely that he looked like a wax figure. "On the night you came to Velour," I said, my tone clinical and precise, "you did not just come for dinner. You came to close a deal with the Sterling Group." Ethan remained silent, his eyes glued to the paper. "According to these witness statements, and the email confirmation you sent to your investors, you explicitly stated that you had a familial partnership with the ownership of the building. You used that lie to induce them to sign a letter of intent for a $2 million investment." I leaned forward. "In legal terms, Ethan, that is called fraudulent inducement. You used a verifiable lie about your assets, specifically, your connection to me, to secure financial gain." Ethan looked up. His hands were shaking again. But the deal fell through. They walked out. I didn't get the money. So there is no fraud, no harm, no foul. I shook my head slowly. "That is not how contracts work," I said, "and more importantly, that is not how I work." I tapped the document. "Your original lease for the office space has a standard morality and compliance clause. It states that any tenant who uses the address or the reputation of the building to conduct fraudulent business activities is subject to an immediate, punitive fine of 3 times the annual rent." I let the number hang in the air. 3 times the annual rent on a prime downtown office was nearly $400,000. "If I enforce this clause," I continued, "the money in the trust, the money I just gave Mom and Dad, gets frozen to pay the debt. You go bankrupt. They go bankrupt. Everybody loses everything." Ethan stared at me. The horror on his face was absolute. He looked at our parents. My mother had her hand over her mouth, a silent scream trapped in her throat. My father looked like he was having heart palpitations. You cannot do that," Ethan whispered. "You said you wanted to save them. You said if I signed the papers, they would be safe." "I did," I said, and I meant it. I reached across the table and took the paper back from his trembling fingers. I placed it back in the thin folder. I did not shred it. I closed the folder and placed my hand on top of it. "I am not going to enforce this penalty today," I said. The air in the room seemed to rush back in. Ethan slumped in his chair. "But," I added, sharpening my tone to a razor edge, "I am keeping this file. It is going into a safe in my office. It has no expiration date." Ethan looked at me, confused. "Why?" "Because I know you. Ethan," I said, "I know that right now. You are sorry. You are scared. But in 6 months? In a year? You will start to forget how this felt. You will get comfortable. You will start to think that maybe you can cut a corner here. Tell a little white lie there. You will think that because you are a Vaughn, the rules do not apply to you." I tapped the folder under my hand. "This is my insurance policy. This is a kill switch." I looked him dead in the eye. "If you ever use my name to get a table again, I file this. If you ever tell a client you have a secret connection to my firm, I file this. If you ever try to leverage our parents' retirement money for another one of your schemes, I file this." Ethan stared at me. He realized then that I was not just punishing him, I was putting him in a cage. I was constructing a wall around his worst impulses that was so high he could never climb over it. "You are treating me like a criminal," he said, his voice thick with shame. "I am treating you like a liability." I corrected him, "and I am mitigating my risk." I stood up. The movement signaled that the meeting was over. The finality of it was absolute. Ethan stood up too. He looked at the folder under my hand, then at me. For the first time, there was no anger in his face. There was only a profound, hollow realization. He had spent his life thinking power was about being the loudest person in the room. He realized now that power was the ability to sit in silence and control the outcome. "Tessa," he said, He struggled with the words. You really do not need me, do you? I looked at him. I thought about the girl who waited for approval. I thought about the teenager who heard she was average. I thought about the woman who built a kingdom in the dark so no one could tear it down. No, Ethan, I said softly. I never did. I turned to my parents. They were looking at me with an expression I had never seen before. It was not love, exactly. It was awe. It was the look one gives to a stranger they suddenly realize is dangerous and impressive. They realized that my silence over the years had not been weakness. It had been a strategy. I had been playing a long game while they were playing house. Go help him pack, I told them. I did not wait for a response. I turned and walked out of the conference room. I walked down the long corridor of my building. My heels clicked against the polished concrete floor, a steady, rhythmic sound that echoed like a heartbeat. I walked past the open office doors where my employees were working. Analysts analyzing, architects drawing, dealmakers making calls. They looked up as I passed, nodding with respect. They did not know the drama that had just played out in the conference room. They only knew that the captain was on the bridge. I took the elevator down to the lobby. I walked out of the metro tower and crossed the street to Velour. It was early, just before the dinner rush. The restaurant was quiet. The staff was setting the tables, polishing the silverware until it gleamed. I walked through the dining room. I walked past the corner table where I had sat in the shadows. I walked past the prime table in the center where Ethan had held court. I walked all the way to the front entrance. I pushed open the heavy double doors, the front door that Ethan had mocked, the door he said I wasn't good enough to walk through. The cool evening air hit my face. It smelled of rain and exhaust and possibility. I stopped on the sidewalk and looked back. Through the glass, I could see the warm, golden light of the restaurant. I could see Miles at the podium, straightening the reservation book. I could see the life I had built, brick by brick, dollar by dollar, truth by truth. Ethan was somewhere behind me, packing a box, learning the hardest lesson of his life. My parents were with him, grappling with the new reality of their world. But I was here, standing on my own pavement. I took a deep breath. I did not win because I am rich. Money is just a scorecard. I won because I no longer have to ask anyone for permission to walk into the places where I belong. I turned and walked down the street, disappearing into the city that was finally, undeniably, mine. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I would love to hear from you. Please comment below and tell me where in the world you are listening from. I really enjoy connecting with you all. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to the Lila Revenge Stories channel, like this video, and hit the hype button to help this story get heard by more people.